Grab your popcorn because it's El Clasico. Hikaru Nakamura playing with the white pieces in this game, a man who's an eye-watering 2400 right now on chess.com, and his opponent, the one and only world number one, it's Magma Volcanoson. This is an epic encounter in titillating Tuesday, 13th of May, late tournament. It's online chess at its best. Let's dive in here. So Hikaru opens up with the king pawn, and Magnus plays the La France Défense variation. He was going for it all tournament. D5's played and Hikaru exchanges. Magnus briefly falls asleep. Luckily his father's on hand to douse him with water, snap him back into it, and after takes, the knight developing, these are some of the main moves for black. But does Magnus do any of them? No, he imbalances immediately with this move. Now it is still common, but after this and this, we're getting into some unknown territories here because Magnus doesn't go knight f6, or let's say lesser known territories. He's about to develop that bishop to f5, get rid of the dangerous one for white. Very harmonious system. Hikaru now maneuvering that knight to open the queen's defense, and after takes, queen recaptures. Magnus now teasing with queen d7. Where's the king headed? We see knight e3, and now it's revealed. He castles kingside. Boo. Hikaru copies. Quick king safety fist bump. Exploded out for the safe monarchs. And you could play steady here. Rook e8, that kind of thing. But no. Magnus wants to fight. And he roars like a chess lion as he pushes that f pawn down the board here. Hikaru takes the open file with that strong rook. Magnus charges forward. And he really discombobulates this knight as it gets kicked back to c2. Bit uncomfortable for the bishop now. White definitely a tad worse, and we love to see it. Queen f5. Magnus offering the change of the ladies here. Hikaru obliges. You couldn't leave that one so strong there. Knight recaptures. Magnus wants to really grind like a grandma now. Deep into the end game. Now bishop d2 connects the rooks, and Magnus challenges the only open file on the board. Hikaru needs a plan here, and he goes for one of his favourites. It's pawn b3. He's looking to expand. Pawn storm Magnus through the centre. So h6 is now played, and it prepares counterplay. Love this, because after the explosive c4, looks like you're getting steamrolled. If takes, you give white this big centre, but no, this is what Magnus has got planned. He launches Gary the G-pawn down the board. Andrea absolutely loves it. Starts spinning those beats. Bishop c3 is now played to protect d4 some more, anticipate g4, and Magnus could play it. He doesn't do so though. Goes for b6, keeping an eye on the c5 idea. Now we see rook a d1, and again, what happens if pawn g4 was not played? We're in the back cave here. Well, here's one sample line. You can challenge the file, if rook takes, knight recaptures. If you want to keep the rooks on, apparently best according to the all-seeing overlord computer. Well, here's how the line could go. You do find an outpost, and you get something like this and this, and black's a bit for choice. Weak, isolated queen pawn. Magnus decided not to push though. He instead expanded over here. Now we see pawn h3, preventing that idea, taking control of g4 and the oft overlooked i4. We get the exchange of a pair of rooks with check, and Magnus now activates the king in the endgame. Hikaru copies, rook a8, goes for the expansion, and best here is pushing a4. You actually don't want to allow these ideas, but missed. Hikaru goes for a kind of endgame bomb cloud with this one. He just hasn't learnt his lesson, despite all the lines he wrote recently. Now we get knight b4, and Hikaru's in a world of pain, because you threaten to take here, and you threaten to take here. How do you parry both threats? Well, taking is the obvious, but if you go with the knight, captures, bishop goes somewhere, you crash through. Well, what if you go with the bishop? Well, this is how the game proceeded, but still you've got problems. Therefore, this guy has to miserably defend. That's a very problematic rook. This is a strong one, and you've got big trouble after takes, pawn recaptures, and the excellent pawn push by Magnus. He plays pawn to c5 here. Great move, because whatever you now do with the pawn structure, you're taking control of tons of dark squares. Look at this knight. It's just got no good journey at all, and this one's got so many invasion ideas. Plus b3 could be on the way, using pins, so we don't see the push. Could have been played, then the bishop spins round. Instead we see king d3, now the knight takes, Magnus changing the structure here, but we don't see recaptures. I mean, it's tricky whatever white does, but basically black gets a great game on the dark squares. The rook could be coming for the pin win. Also, there's ideas of pawn b3 using the pins down here. Rook a3 could be on the way here. It's such a dangerous endgame. So Hikaru tries knight to d2, looking to blockade that pawn. Now the bishop activates, knight b3, and the king slides up the board. Take the bishop, no worries. Repair the structure, the rook's still invading. So king e4 was tried, but now an excellent move from Magnus. This is where he shows his real endgame goatery. He just picks up the pawn and sacrifices it on d3, saying you take me, I take you. It's playable, but black gets another big invasion going basically. Here's a sample line. So difficult to keep the enemy forces out, and you can just run in the king eventually. The bishop does great with pawns on both sides of the board. This is a really bad endgame. So we see f3 played instead, but Magnus, just desperate to sacrifice Deirdre, pushes her on one more. Now taken, and here's his point. After check, king stumbling backwards, you could have gone forwards, but that gets really risky. You want to try and stop the invasion. However, check, it's impossible to do so. If the knight hadn't been there, you could have stepped back. Really astute play by Magnus. The bishop's now on the way to the promised land here, and so we see this one stepping out the pin. The pawn drops, and this one goes for the check and the counterplay. However, after the king moves away, do you really want to take that bishop? Well, who are you really helping? Black's just in such a good position. So knight d2 is played. Now the rook comes behind this pawn. Hikaru goes for a desperate exchange. They're both scrambling on seconds. The rook sidesteps. Rook e1 goes for counterplay. And after another pawn drops, Hikaru invades. And look at this. Pope E3 is born. It's no longer a bishop. What a monster piece. Check is played. King g6. The knight activates, but here comes the rook, winning another pawn. That's 3 connected passed pawns running down the board. King e2 goes for the rook. Don't blunder it, don't worry, he's the world blitz co-champion. Check is played, the king slithers up the board, and after this move, it's the nail in the coffin, because you go for the bishop, but Magnus sees a tactic that Hikaru's overlooked. In the time trouble, checks the king, and we see resigns, because if the king steps back, you take the knight and defend the bishop, and of course the pawns are just running. That is game over. So Magnus takes it home, and if you want to know what happened in the tournament, have a look at this incredible game on screen here between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen. And by the way, hope you enjoyed these new chess graphics and cards on screen here. Something new I'm trying out. Let me know your thoughts on it. I think it's really cool and adds a little element to the footage of the game as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for tuning in, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.